Well, good afternoon, folks. It's Dr. Kremens here on Wednesday. You probably notice I have another little friend here. This is Marble. I don't know if she's appeared in these videos very much before. She decided to jump up on my lap. I hope you're all doing well with the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. I know these two cats really would like to be outside on the porch, which is what they like to do. But here in the city, the air has not been good at all. I was doing some work for our class yesterday on the porch, and which is sometimes where I'll grade or work on the quizzes or the papers, and I just couldn't do it. So I hope you're all okay, and if you do have to be outside, you've got a mask or something because hopefully this smoke will start to clear. I have a friend who lived in Denver for a while, and said that he was Marvel's leaving now. She's she doesn't want to be part of this. Who lived in Denver for a while and said that occasionally they'd get smoke from wildfires in the area, and he lives up in Wisconsin now, and he said he's never seen anything like it. I think it's probably even smokier up there the further north you get. So anyway, hope you all are doing well today, and staying safe. Hopefully this will pass sooner than later. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the papers. I think we went through some good stuff on Monday night. Posted the grades for the quizzes from Monday, so if you haven't had a chance to look on Blackboard, you can take a look at that, and I'll give those back to you on Monday. In addition to the little in-class writings that we did, I'm going to add some notes to those and also give you those back on Monday. If you did those, by the way, on Google Docs, I'll also add notes for you though for those as well before Monday's class. And that's just a way to sort of see where we are with the class. And as I mentioned, and as I've been mentioning on some of the papers themselves, when we get to the end of July, you'll also have an opportunity to do a revision of one of these early papers. So my goal with having you do that sort of in-class reflection was also that you have notes on those first couple of papers, so that when it comes time to go back and to revisit that, maybe one of those earlier papers at the end of July, at the end of our course, then you'll have some notes of what you were thinking when you wrote them. Because the further we get away from those first two papers, the less you may remember about some of the details that you worked on in those essays. So I'll also give you some notes on that. Now, in the meantime, as I mentioned on Monday, your main homework, obviously, for this week is paper number 3. So I wanted to go through the directions again with you in a little bit more detail, make some references to the readings, just to give you some more ideas as you're working. Now, as always, if you'd like me to read a draft, send one my way. I've already read a couple of drafts that people have sent me, and I've given comments on those, so I'm happy to do that. Happy to give you suggestions on how to approach this paper. The first thing to remember, and I'll do a screen share in a minute with the directions, is as we talked about in class on Monday, we're using the same structure or outline as we did for the second paper, and that's a standard sort of academic college essay sort of structure. Where you have your introduction, you introduce the main idea, you respond, excuse me, respond a little bit to the readings that you're doing, almost as though you're in conversation with whichever one of the authors that you're responding to, which I'll talk more about also in a minute. And then in the second half, much like we did with the second essay, you're doing more of an analysis, a discussion. And again, it depends on which of the topics you're doing in terms of what kind of discussion or analysis you'll do. But you really become the focus of the essay in the second half. And as I mentioned on Monday and in our previous classes, that's significant because that's what I'm interested in seeing is your ideas. What are the main ideas that you're focusing on? What are your thoughts, particularly in the second half of the paper, if you're writing about the scent, the music, or again, that kind of inspirational moment or a person in your life, if you're doing topic number 3. So anyway, let me do the screen share and excuse me. My allergies have not been good with the kind of smoke that we've been having in the air either. So let me do the screen share. And then what I'm going to show you here, again, are just some details on the assignment. So I'm going to go in here and then, excuse me, open up the assignment sheet, and we'll take a little bit of a look at it again. I want to just highlight some ideas. And these are things also that, as I mentioned in our upcoming class, again on Monday, we'll talk a little bit more about format. We will do some grammatical style things, in relation to that style sort of worksheet that I talked about in Monday night's class. We were going to do a little bit more on that. As I said a couple of nights ago, going through grammar and style stuff is not always exciting, but we'll do hopefully some interesting stuff in class. You can kind of think a little bit about your style and your structure. So again, for this one, it's due, under our more normal schedule by 5 p.m. on Monday. Please just share the paper with me via Google Docs. And, one of the things I mentioned to all my classes, excuse me, particularly in English 101, especially if it's one of your first college classes or within your first year of taking college classes, one of the best things you can do for yourself is just go through the directions, take some time, even before you start writing, look through the directions, kind of see what the teacher's suggesting to you, what the professor wants. In my case, I try to give, as you've probably seen, sort of detailed prompts, and I try to write them almost in the same structure of the paper itself. So just to kind of go through these again in a little bit more detail, this kind of formatting stuff at the very beginning of the directions, we've talked about, that's pretty standard. As I mentioned in Monday night's class, most of you have been doing really well in terms of following the Times New Roman 12-point font. But also remember, you don't have to skip spaces between the paragraphs when you're double spacing your paper. Make sure to indent the paragraphs. Some of that is also part of the MLA format. And MLA, I've touched on this a little bit. It's the Modern Language Association. Most of us English professors are a member of that organization, and they set some of these rules and these kind of formatting issues, and not just for student papers. I mean, this is the same thing for me when I'm, working on an article or, editing somebody's article. We have to follow those same kind of guidelines, which includes the same font, the Times New Roman, the 12-point. So those are all those kind of formatting issues that are just expected. Most of your college papers will also follow a variation of that format. So anytime I mention any of those details here, I'm also following along with those kind of guidelines of what these papers should look like, in terms of the overall format of the font and all that sort of thing. So these are things just to double check. I always think of this part of the directions with the guidelines as one of the things you can check when you're done with the paper. When you've done you've written your ideas out, you kind of gone through them, you checked over your work. This is kind of a good checklist to do these, A through D here, these little comments. Now, the other thing I want to mention for this paper, just as a reminder, and then I'm going to go through these prompts in a little bit more detail to give you some more suggestions. Remember also for this, particularly because now we're in the third paper, you want to make sure that you have the works cited after the final paragraph. And when you're doing that, as I said in class on Monday, I've already given you the works cited format. That's something that I'll ask you to do when we get into the fifth paper for the class over the course of the next month in July. But they're already here. So just as an example, if you're working on topic number 1, your source for that is the Evelyn Glennie hearing essay. A couple other things I wanted to mention is there's a couple of supplementary readings or videos on Glennie. There's the TED Talk, in which she explains the essay a little bit more detail. There's also the Sesame Street clip that we watched. We watched the clips from the documentary on Monday night to hear more of the details of her life in her own voice. But for our paper, you want to work with the article. So that's hearing essay, which we looked at on Monday. We looked at that first paragraph in particular. And so you want to draw quotations from the article to support your ideas and to sort of engage in a kind of a conversation with her in the first half of the paper. So for topic number 1, your works cited would just be, you put works cited there, and then you'd have the Evelyn Glennie, and you can just cut and paste that to the end of your paper. And that's the format. That's MLA format. So you want to make sure that that's at the end of the essay. It allows the reader, by the way, also to look up the material. A lot of the kind of citations that we use for college papers, obviously they're there to sort of avoid issues with plagiarism. You want to indicate where you got your sources from, where the ideas came from that you're quoting. But it's also a means of letting the reader find that information on their own. The whole idea of citing something and including a work cited is designed to let the reader look up the article for themselves. So if they find a quotation in your piece of writing that they find interesting, then they can go to the end of your paper or your essay and say, oh, this comes from Hearing Essay by Evelyn Glennie. And then they can look it up on their own and find what they think about it as they read it over. So that's the whole point of a works cited. Same thing for topic number 2. That one relates to Alyssa Harrod and her ideas on scent. So if you're doing that paper, your works cited simply has to be, this piece here, from Alyssa Harrod, which has the link. It's got the website, so that's in the format. And the same thing for topic number 3. Excuse me, when you're quoting from Sinead O'Connor, responding to her, you can use the piano. You could use the Muhammad Ali essay because both of those are about inspirations that she had from her past. Then you see that here, and then you just have to include that at the end. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, and we'll keep working more on this, especially as we get into the second half of the semester here. The first part of the paper really focuses on that writer. So you want, just 2 simple quotations from them. I have a sample paragraph here. that's based on Sontag from our last paper, where you can see, the quotations embedded in the middle of the paragraph. You give some commentary on it. And I take some of this here, this section that talks about using a direct quotation. This, I have to credit my colleague, Dr. King, Meg King, in our department, because we've talked about this kind of structure before. And what she describes these paragraphs as being like when you're using a quotation from an outside source, she describes them as being like a sandwich. If I had an image of a sandwich, I'd share it with you right now. Actually, you know what? I do have a sandwich with me. I have a cheese sandwich right here. I'm going to have lunch here in a couple of minutes. Anyway, the way Meg describes it, and I like this comparison, is she thinks of I'm I'm sorry if this gets silly, but anyway, here we go. So you got like the first part of the paragraph is like the top of the piece of bread for the sandwich, right? You're introducing it. It's not the body of it necessarily, but you have some opening sentences. It's like the top of your sandwich, right? And then in the middle, you have your quotation, which would be, in my case, I'm just having a cheese sandwich. It's a very, very simple minimalist kind of sandwich I'm having today. So that's in the middle of it, and that's where you put your quotation. And as you can see here on the sample paragraph, I've got a couple of opening sentences, which again, my colleague compares to like the top piece of bread for a sandwich. The quotation's in the middle. That's your piece of cheese, or your piece of chicken or tofu, whatever it is that you happen to like in your sandwiches, maybe a hamburger or something, whatever. And that's in the middle. And that's what you want to quote, and in this case, I've got this citation from Susan Sontag here in the middle. And then the end of the paragraph, which my colleague, Dr. King, describes as the bottom part of the sandwich, the lower piece of bread, that's your commentary or your feedback or your response to the quotation. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. So that's the sandwich theory of writing a paragraph with direct quotations in it. So that's a metaphor, like I said, that I find kind of useful because it's accurate. And I've kind of described it a little bit more here, where again, as I say here at the end of the directions, introduce your quotation, explain its context. You can say, according to the essay or the article, Hearing Essay by Evelyn Glennie, there are different types of hearing. Sometimes hearing is misunderstood, but music is something that all people can experience, and there's different kinds of music. For example, Evelyn Glennie in her article says that there are abstract and more concrete forms of music, as we talked about on Monday night. And you can talk about that a little bit. Do you agree? Do you disagree with her? So that's just a way of sort of responding to the readings. That's going to be very useful for you as you get into other classes that require longer research papers, where you're going into multiple sources and you're taking out quotations and sort of responding to them, and you're really kind of weaving them into your paper. So I don't know. I hope that helps. Again, I'm glad I have my sandwich here with me to kind of give you that metaphor. I'll have that when I finish making this video. So that's just some of the technical stuff in terms of the formatting and using the works cited at the end of the paper. So all that's in there in the directions to help you. So there's like sort of a map of the essay here as well. And now let's go to these prompts a little bit, and I'll sort of jump back and forth. I might show you one of the readings here in a second. So in the first one, like I said, there's all of these topics basically are going to produce papers that have two parts. You're going to have the two quotations from your source that you're going to respond to in the first part of the paper, reflect on them a little bit. And then in the second half, you're again, as we did with the second paper, analyzing or discussing something of your own. So if it's topic number one, you're going to then write about a favorite piece of music or a favorite song that you particularly enjoy. If you're doing topic number two, then you're going to quote from Alyssa Harad. We talked about this on Monday when she talks about the greed that she has for experience, that she is able to locate through the use of scent, through the perfumes that she collects, which give her a sense of purpose. And as I also mentioned, in the case of Alyssa Harad, becoming interested in perfumes that was one of the things that inspired her first book. So it kind of took her on the journey she's on now as a writer, as we talked about on Monday night. And then lastly, of course, with Sinead O'Connor, you've got two essays in which she talks about her sources of inspiration. In the case of the piano, it's her grandmother's piano that seems to be speaking to her, that gives her an idea that she wants to become a musician. She takes the musical influences from her family and then tries to turn that into a real sense of purpose, particularly coming from the sort of abusive household that she comes from. And in the case of the Muhammad Ali piece, she's not only talking about family and her children, but she's also talking about how much she admired him not only because of his ability to work through the Parkinson's that afflicted him later in his life, but earlier on as a major figure in American history, especially in the 60s, 70s, into the early 80s, where he's a really important historical heroic figure, particularly during the era of the Vietnam War of the late 60s and into the early 70s. So she really admired him. So you kind of see her looking at him and saying, here's another one of my inspirations. So let me go back to the Evelyn Glennie for a second. Just to give you an example, if I were writing on that topic, you want to go back into your readings. And just to kind of reiterate what we said a couple of nights ago, if you go into hearing essay, I'm going to open this up here for you. There's a lot of good material in here on how she creates music. Let me move my little video here out of the way so I can enlarge the screen here a little bit. But this first part of it has a lot of material on music. So just again, as an example, if I were using quotations from her within the first first paragraph here, even the idea that music represents life, that's a short sentence, right? It may seem on the surface that there's not a lot to comment on there, but this is clearly someone who's saying that everything that they do, every bit of inspiration for them comes from this musical talent that she has. And we saw that came from her family as well. Her parents encouraged her even as she was losing her hearing. So what does it mean to say music represents life? Does that mean it's joyful? It gives you a sense of purpose. It gives you a sense of hope in times where there's hopelessness. Even a short quotation like that is something that you can comment on. What does she mean? What do you think she means when she says music represents life based on what we know about her? Now, the other part that I mentioned on Monday is another example as a quotation that's brief, but interesting. A particular piece of music could describe something real or something fictional or something abstract. Now, I've thought about this a little bit more, in terms of like what song would I select if I were going to write about this. And I have some different favorite songs. I've posted some of them over the last few weeks, but I noticed that I tend to like music that does have very specific lyrics that tells a story. So if I were going to write about this, I would say, according to Evelyn Glennie, there's different kinds of music. Now it brings joy, but it can bring joy through telling a story, whether that story is a piece of fiction that the songwriter imagined, whether it's something real. When I think of real, I think of country music that may tell stories that are true to daily life. I think of folk music like Woody Guthrie or Leadbelly that tells stories about people's real lives, historical situations. And I realized, I thought about this even driving home on Monday night. I tend to like music that is not only has lyrics, but then also tends to have lyrics that have some kind of meaning to them, whether that's more contemporary music or older music that I like. As much as I really enjoy classical music or jazz, that's instrumental and different types of music from all around the world, I really get interested in music that has a lyric that I can latch onto, even if it's in a language that I don't entirely know or don't know at all, but if I can get a translation of the lyric or of the poem that's being set to music, I really get interested in it. So I think if I were writing the paper for topic number one, that's one of the approaches I would probably take, is I would probably focus on the fact that, in my opinion, I like music, as she says here, that describes a real event, that tells me a story, that lets me get to know the person that created this piece of music. And maybe that would be the focus that I would do. It's very similar in some ways also, if I go back to the topics again for this, to the second one. If I were talking about favorite scents, we just had dinner last night with a couple of good friends of ours who were visiting from Louisiana, and we took them to one of our favorite Italian restaurants. And for me, the smell of good marinara sauce and a plate of ravioli, that's going to bring back certain memories. So if I were writing about Alyssa Harad, where she talks about the greed that she has for experience, for me, when I smell certain scents, especially of that kind of food, because my mom is part Italian American. That was a tradition growing up. We always had pasta on Sundays. That was a tradition my mom carried on from her dad's family, from my grandfather, whose parents were Italian immigrants, and who carried on those traditions from where they'd come from in Frigento back in Italy. So if I were writing on the second topic, I'd be interested in talking a little bit about Glennie, or not Glennie, excuse me, Harad, and that idea of how scents can evoke kind of memories and can give you a sense of purpose. Now, for the third paper, This one's interesting. I think I mentioned this on Monday night. I would probably write about one of my favorite teachers from college, because that when I saw Professor Bill Cook was my undergrad advisor. I had him for a couple of classes. When I saw him in the classroom, he was the one that made me want to become a teacher. So if I were writing about O'Connor, I would say, well, for her, she talks about the influence of that piano in her grandmother's house. She talks about the influence of Muhammad Ali. But for me, if I had to pinpoint one moment, it would be the moment that, I was in Bill Cook's class. I'll even show you a picture of him actually while I have you here. William W. Cook from Dartmouth College. He was one of my absolute favorites. And sadly, I think I mentioned the other night, he passed away a few years ago now. But without Bill Cook here, even when I look at these old photos of him, I remember him being in the classroom, the way he's got his hand here extended. He was a great professor, very kind, very encouraging, and very inspiring in the classroom. And the first time I saw him lecture when I was a first-year college student, I was like, oh, wow. Not only does this look like he's having a lot of fun, but I wonder what it would be like to be a teacher and do what he does. And so that's who I would probably describe as is the moment I remember first seeing him in the classroom. And I like showing the photos of him because, like I said, he was a big inspiration for me. So let me go back let me stop the screen share. Those are just some other ideas I thought I'd share with you, from, ideas I have on the papers to the metaphor of the sandwich, which I'm about to eat once I finish up with this video. So just to wrap things up a little bit, as always, please email me. I'm happy to read drafts. I'm happy to take a look and give you further suggestions if you get stuck with the paper. As I've also said, and this is something I learned partly from Professor Cook when I was an undergraduate like you, take your time. Try to write this in smaller pieces. If you do it in, smaller increments, you're going to find that it's a less stressful process, and it's also a lot more fun. So that's another suggestion that I would have for you. All right. So if you have any other questions, like I said, send me an email. Be careful in this crazy air quality stuff that we're having. I'm going to go see if these kitties also need a little bit of a snack here as I eat my lunch. And I'll be back, as always, on Friday with our end of the week update and reminder. I'll post one of my favorite songs, not the one I mentioned in class the other night, the metal song I mentioned. I'll post one of my other favorites as a kind of end of the week announcement. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you again on Friday.